My name is Evelyn Hart and I've lived most of my life in control, not of people. No, I've never had much authority there but of harmony, rhythm, and breath. In the choir loft of C. Luke's parish, I wielded a baton with the gentle firmness of someone who knew what the next note would be. Widowed, no children. My husband Richard died a decade ago of a silent heart attack in his sleep. We'd spent 34 years together, most of it peaceful, some of cold, and all of it expected. There were no arguments but also no arias. Mourned him the way I sang funerals, with reverence, restraint, and a certain practiced distance. After his death I found comfort in the music ministry. See, Luke's wasn't a grand cathedral. Was a modest white chapel tucked at the edge of town with old wood floors and a sanctuary that smelled of candle wax and hymnals. I poured myself into the choir. Sunday practices, Wednesday rehearsals, festival planning. It filled the space that had once been occupied by a man who, bless him, had never known how to fill me. I kept my blouses buttoned high, my lipstick neutral, my skirts long, dignified. I told myself this was grace, maturity. But I was just waiting for what I didn't know until Nathaniel. He arrived the way music does before a storm. Subtle, stirring, and impossible to ignore. He was 26, too young to wait, unaware of what he did to the air when he walked into a room. He had a voice that made sopranos forget their pitch, and altos blush. Baritones envied him. Tenors tried to imitate him. No one. The first time he sang, it was during open rehearsal. He'd come with his mother, a devout member of the parish, who insisted her son had been blessed with talent. I expected the usual overconfident mumble from a boy coddled by praise. But when he opened his mouth, when that sound came out, the room stilled. It wasn't the strength of his voice that stunned me. It was the ache in it. There are singers who hit notes and then there are singers who become them. Nathaniel was the latter. After the session I approached him. Tried to keep my tone professional. Tried not to let my voice waver. Been trained, I said. Just a little, he replied. Mostly gospel, some classical. I sing when I can't say things. He didn't know what to say to that. So I said, we'd love to have you join us. We meet Wednesdays. He smiled, not with his mouth, with his whole face. I'll be. And he was every week punctual, respectful, kind. He called me ma'am for the first month until one evening after. He stayed behind to help me stack hymnals. He said, "Is it all right if I call you Evelyn?" Should have meant nothing, but it didn't crack something. I began to notice him in ways that made me uncomfortable. The way he leaned in when listening, the way he sang with his eyes closed, the way his laughter settled into my chest like something warm. I told myself it was admiration, gratitude, innocent. But innocence has a tone. It isn't the way my heart began to beat when he entered the room. One Wednesday after rehearsal, it was raining hard. Most of the choir had left. Nathaniel lingered, pretending to organize sheet music. "Do you need a ride?" he asked. He looked up, drenched in lamplight. "If it's not too much trouble." I told myself I was being kind, Christian even. He got into my car, water dripping from his curls. Handed him a towel from the back seat. "Thank you, Evelyn," he said softly. Something about the way he said my name made the car feel too small. We drove in silence for a while. The kind that isn't me. The kind that hums. At a red light he spoke. "Do you ever miss being touched?" I gripped the steering wheel. "I'm sorry," he added quickly. "I didn't mean to." "Yes," I said. The light turned green. I didn't drive. He looked at me. Really looked. And in that moment the decades between us vanished. So did the titles, the expectations, the caution. Didn't kiss him. Not then. But the breath I took wasn't mine. When I dropped him off, he thanked me again. Said he'd see me Sunday. He nodded. That night, for the first time in years, I stood in front of the mirror and unbuttoned my blouse slowly. Not for anyone, just to remember what my skin looked like when it wasn't hiding. I was the choir director. I still am, but something had started. Not an affair. Remembering a voice of body of hunger. And the choir would never sound the same again. Started small like most dangerous things do. A glance held too long. A pause in rehearsal that stretched into silence. A moment when our hands brushed while exchanging sheet music and neither of us pulled away. Kept telling myself I was imagining it. The way he looked at me. The way his voice curved differently when we sang. Alone when no one else was in the loft. But the truth is I didn't want to stop imagining. In fact, the fantasy became more real to me than anything else in my life. Every Wednesday he stayed after. Not always with excuse. Sometimes he just lingered watching me pack up. Offering to lock the cabinet, asking about old hymns. And I let him because he reminded me that I was still a woman. Not just a director, not just a widow. Not just a ghost inside sensible shoes. And polite applause. Then came the solo. We were preparing for Easter Mass and I had written an arrangement, a slow, aching version of Were You There When They Crucified My Lord? Needed certain vulnerability. Ironies I knew at the moment I wrote it that it was meant for him. Nathaniel, I said, handing him the sheet music. Would you consider singing this solo? He took it from me. Gently, our fingers grazing again. He nodded. The next rehearsal he sang it. And I couldn't breathe. His voice cracked in the middle of the third verse. Not from lack of skill but from feeling. The room fell silent, every eye on him, every ear suspended in reverence. Even the old stained glass windows seemed to pulse with color. My chest ached, not from pride, from something deeper, something that felt like longing and shame tied up in ribbon. When the session ended, people patted him on the back, but I kept my distance. Had to. My thoughts were too loud, my skin too aware. Later that night my phone buzzed. A message from I saw you crying during the solo. Are you okay? I stared at the screen. Then with shaking fingers I typed. Wasn't crying because I was sad, he replied. No. That was the first time I felt truly exposed. Not as a choir director but as Evelyn, the woman who hadn't been held, hadn't been noticed in too many years. The next Sunday I avoided him on purpose. Asked another choir member to conduct warm-ups. Needed distance, space, anything to quiet the rush in my chest. But during the offertory he caught my eye. Once, that was all. Flicker, promise. And that afternoon he showed up at my door. I hadn't given him my address. He said he asked his mother. I just wanted to make sure you were all right. He said, I know church makes you wear armor. I stepped aside. We sat on my living room couch, neither of us touching, both of us electrified. He asked about my late husband, about the choir's history, about the old piano in corner. And then he asked softly, did anyone ever teach you how to be worshipped? Not for what you give but for what you are. I think my breath caught so hard it scraped my ribs. I stood up, walked to the kitchen to get us tea, but I never poured it. I just stood there, hands trembling over 2 empty cups, wondering how I got to this age, having never been asked that question. When I turned around, he was behind me, not touching, just near. You don't have to say yes, he whispered. But I didn't say. Well, that night nothing happened. Nothing in everything. He stayed until midnight. We really talked. About faith, about loss, about bodies. And silence. He played me a song he wrote when his father left. Played him a melody I'd composed and hidden in my drawer since 1993. And before he left, he touched my face just lightly, just once, as if I was something sacred. After he left, I didn't sleep. Sat at the piano until dawn, playing every dissonant chord I could remember and crying, not because I was afraid but because I had finally been seen. Strange how the sanctuary, a place designed for quiet reverence, can feel louder after a night like that. Morning light streamed through the stained glass as if God himself were watching me with narrowed eyes. But all I could think about was Nathaniel's fingers brushing my cheek, the weight of the silence between us that hummed like a cello string pulled too tight. Arrived early that Sunday, earlier than usual, under the pretense of tuning the piano. In truth, I needed the space to breathe, to clear the night's lingering electricity from my skin. But it clung. No matter how many times I wiped the keys or adjusted the sheet music, I felt that one touch echoing like a low, endless note. When Nathaniel walked in, his gaze met mine immediately. He said nothing, just nodded. That was enough to undo me. I thought I was composed. Thought I could compartmentalize. When we began rehearsing that morning, when his voice joined the others in the hymn, I felt something crack inside me. His notes didn't just harmonize. They aimed directly for the place in me that had long gone quiet. And worse, he knew. We made it through the service. Barely. Afterward, the usual parade of handshakes and praises greeted me at the north. Nathaniel waited behind them. I tried to walk past. He didn't let me. You're not okay, he said softly, almost reverently. No, you spar at. He looked around, then leaned closer. Then let me carry some of it. Those words, more than a touch, more than a kiss, felt like a door unlocking. That evening, I invited him to dinner. It was the first time I had done something like that since Richard died. I made roast chicken, candles lit, but not for romance, for grounding. Everything felt heavier, the air, the silverware, the way he watched me move around the kitchen as if I were a song he hadn't yet learned. We ate slowly in soft conversation, but under the surface something stronger stirred. Said once that you sing when you can't say things, I murmured. He nodded. And sing here just for me. And he did. Nathaniel stood in my living room and sang a hymn I hadn't heard in years. Old Appalachian, spiritual, raw and deep. Something about surrender and grace and fire. I sat in silence, hands trembling in my lap, while he peeled every layer off my soul with each verse. He finished. Neither of us moved. Dangerous, I said. Only if you keep pretending you don't feel it too. Good. He stepped toward me. Nathaniel, he began. But there was no sentence to finish because in the next breath we collided. It wasn't like the movies. Violins, no slow fade, just heat. Ends. Years of silence ripped open. My blouse. His breath, the press of mouth that had waited too long. We didn't rush. We ate. His hands were reverent, not greedy. Body responded with a hunger that scared me. Not for the act, but for the tenderness I never knew was possible. When it was over, we lay tangled on my sofa. The room filled with the scent of candle wax and sweat and something holy. He traced my collarbone with his fingertip. You feel like truth. Laugh. I hadn't laughed like that in years. You feel like a risk I want to. He kissed my shoulder. And let's take it slow and honest. But it was Already too late for slow. We'd passed the line long before that night. The only thing left now was to follow the melody wherever it led. We made love. Again and again. Not always with bodies. Sometimes just with words. His questions, my memories, the songs we sang together late at night at my piano. There were moments we didn't need to be. Our silence was thick with understanding, with permission, but it couldn't stay secret for long. One afternoon, a member of the choir, Elaine, sweet but sharp, knocked on my office door. She closed it behind her. "Evelyn, can I ask you something?" Said carefully. "Course. Is there something going on between you and Nathaniel?" Froze. "What makes you ask? He looks at you like a man in love, and you look lit up." I smiled tightly. "Just the music." She nodded but didn't look convinced. After she left, I sat in my office for an hour staring at nothing, heart pounding like I'd committed a crime. 'Cause maybe I had, but not the one they'd think. The crime wasn't loving him. It was waiting this long to love myself. Began as whispers, faint as the rustle of robes between pews, soft as the hush that falls after a hymn. Caught it in glances exchanged behind folded bulletins, in the tightening of smiles that no longer quite reached the eyes. You see, Luke's had always been a quiet place, but now the quiet trembled with implication. I told myself it was paranoia, that I was imagining the shift, but the knowing look in Elaine's eyes haunted me, and once a doubt is planted, it grows roots in every silence. Nathaniel sensed it too. He came to rehearsal with a hesitance in his step, a politeness too practiced. When we locked eyes, there was a question behind his gaze. "Are we still safe?" I didn't answer. That week the church bulletin listed a surprise meeting of the parish board. Nothing unusual, but the timing stung. My name was mentioned too often in passing, followed by an unnatural pause. After rehearsal, a few choir members stayed behind, lingering near the piano. One of them, Mark, a tenor with more ego than tone, asked casually, "So you and Nathaniel been working on something special?" "Just music," I replied evenly. He smiled, not kindly. "Sure, music." At night, Nathaniel came over unannounced. He stood on my porch in the dark, hands buried in the pockets of his coat, shoulders stiff. "I feel like I'm hurting you," he said. "Open the door." "You're not. They're starting to talk, and you flinch now when I touch." I didn't deny it. We sat inside, without the usual warmth. No candles, no dinner. Just 2 cups of tea that went cold untouched. "Can go," he said quietly. "If this is making your life harder, I can stop coming. I don't want to ruin what you've built." I looked at really looked. The earnest fear in his eyes, the crease in his brow. Was no boy. This was a man willing to disappear for the sake of my comfort. And that somehow broke me more than any accusation ever could. "I don't want you to go," I whispered. "But I'm scared not of them, of how much I want you." We didn't make love that night. We sat in the dark, fingers barely touching, hearts thudding in the shared knowledge that what we had was no longer just. The following Sunday, Father Thomas pulled me aside after Mass. "Evelyn, may I speak with you privately?" He led me to his office, a small room filled with dusty books and the smell of old incense. He didn't sit. Neither did "You've served this parish faithfully for decades," he began. "You've shaped generations with your music, but I have to ask, is there anything you need to tell me about your relationship with Nathaniel Ross?" I didn't breathe. "There's concern," he continued. "Nothing proven, but appearances matter. Especially here." I met his eyes. "He's a choir member, a gifted one. He nodded. And a young man. You're aware of the optics, I assume. That word optics. If everything sacred could be reduced to appearances, we haven't broken any rules, said he sighed. No, but perhaps boundaries. He didn't threaten. He didn't need to. The implication hung in the air. Fix this or we will. At night I cried harder than I had since Richard's funeral. Not out of guilt but grief for the loss of innocence, of safety, of the quiet sanctuary where we could once just be. Nathaniel held me through it, his arms wrapped around me, like a hymn I didn't deserve. Let them talk, he whispered. Let them doubt. But don't doubt yourself. I wished I could believe him. Over the next few weeks things changed. Not between us, but around us. Elaine stopped coming to rehearsals. Mark requested a transfer to another church. A few parishioners, unsubtle, avoided the communion line. When I served, my name once spoken with admiration became a cautionary tale. Nathaniel offered to step down from the choir. No, I said. They don't get to take your voice. But privately I rehearsed alone more often. I spent longer in the chapel at night playing hymns in the dark, trying to find the line between worship and want. The line kept moving. Then the twist I never expected. A letter left on my piano and signed but unmistakable in tone. We trusted you. We looked up to you. It isn't love. It's vanity. Step down before you bring shame to what was once beautiful. My hand shook. That night I didn't go home. I drove for hours past the city limits through empty roads lit only by moonlight. I screamed once loud, primal, into the silence of my car. And I pulled over and sobbed until morning. When I returned, Nathaniel was waiting. He didn't speak. He just opened the door, took me in, held me like I was still whole. And I realized this wasn't about scandal. This was about a life I put on mute. And now that it was playing full volume, the world couldn't handle sound. Neither could I. But I wouldn't silence it again. The Sunday after the letter, I stood behind the organ bench like I had for 20 years. For the first time I couldn't play. My fingers hovered over the keys, but my chest was too full. Not with fear but with refusal. A refusal to keep bending my soul to the comfort of others. Refusal to pretend that what I felt was game. I stood up quietly, walked to the back of the choir loft. Nathaniel met my eyes from the pews below. Shook my head slightly. He understood. After the service I turned in my key. Father. Thomas looked at me for a long time. Are you sure this is what you want, Evelyn? No, I said honestly, but it's what I need. He didn't try to stop me. He just nodded and I walked out of the church I had loved and been loved by for most of my life. I didn't cry. That night, Nathaniel and I sat at my kitchen table. In silence. No candles, no grand declarations, just hands touching across the wood. We lost something today, he. We did. Do you regret it? Looked at him, at the man who had unwrapped the layers of me that even I had forgotten. Not even a little. Wasn't easy those first few weeks. Phone rang less. My inbox quieted. World, once full of community, shrank into a single living room. But within that space something grew. We started recording music together. Not for church, for us, for anyone who'd ever been asked to hide the thing that made them come alive. We wrote hymns of longing, of guilt and glory, braided together. Nathaniel's voice and my piano, imperfect, raw and honest. People listened quietly at first, then louder. Messages started arriving from women in their 50s, 60s saying thank you for speaking the unspeakable, for reminding them that life doesn't end at propriety, that sometimes love arrives late and loud. One message read, "You made me brave enough to leave a marriage I was surviving but not living." Another, "You reminded me I'm not invisible. We weren't just scandal anymore. We were proof." One spring evening almost a year later, Nathaniel and I drove back to St. Luke's. We sat in the parking lot watching the choir through stained glass. I didn't miss it. Not really, because I hadn't lost music. I'd found a fuller version of it. Reached into the glove compartment and pulled out a CD, our first finished album. "Want to drop it in the donation box?" Nathaniel teased. I laughed. Just drive." And we did. We took the back roads through hills and trees and towns too small to name. And as the sun set, he reached over and took my hand. "Don't flinch anymore," he said. "No. I finally understand the difference between fear and respect." He looked at me. "Do you still hear music when you look at me?" I leaned my head on his shoulder. "I hear the whole damn choir." We didn't need a church to feel divine. We had each other and the song. Our song was still being written.